The collapse of the Lantean civilization remains one of the most catastrophic geopolitical failures in recorded history. For millions of years, the ancients were the undisputed hegemons of two galaxies, wielding technology that blurred the line between science and divinity. Yet, their legacy is not one of enlightenment, but of systemic negligence that condemned countless civilizations to millennia of slavery and war. Much like the collapse of terrestrial empires that leave power vacuums filled by tyrants, the ancients' decision to abandon the physical plane did not bring peace. Instead, it transformed the Milky Way into a vast, unguarded armory for the Goa'uld and left the Pegasus galaxy to be harvested by the Wraith. To understand the tragedy of the ancients, we must look beyond the myth of their benevolence and examine the cold, hard historical realities of their rule. This was a civilization that defined itself by its intellectual superiority, yet consistently failed to foresee the consequences of its own expansion. Lasting from their initial schism with the Ori to their final retreat back to Earth 10,000 years ago, the ancient era was characterized by a cycle of hubris, flight, and abandonment. They built a galactic infrastructure, the Stargate network, that was intended to unite worlds. However, in their absence, this very network became the primary tool for the system lords to enforce their brutal oppression. They created life in the Pegasus galaxy, only to leave it defenseless against a predator of their own making. Today, we are analyzing the fall of the ancients not as a mystical event, but as a historical case study in imperial failure. We will trace how a society dedicated to ascension inadvertently created the conditions for the galaxy's darkest ages, and how their refusal to intervene became the ultimate act of moral cowardice. The roots of this galactic tragedy lie in the original schism within the Ultran society millions of years ago. Before they were the ancients, they were a unified people living in a distant galaxy. However, a deep ideological rift formed. On one side stood the Ori, who believed that their impending ascension to a higher plane of existence mandated forced worship and the subjugation of lower beings. On the other stood the Ultrans, who believed in scientific truth and free will. Historically, this is often framed as a noble migration, the Ultrans choosing to flee rather than fight a devastating civil war. However, from a strategic perspective, this decision established a dangerous precedent, the Ultran tendency to retreat rather than resolve conflict. By leaving their home galaxy, they did not defeat the Ori, they simply ceded territory to a radicalized theocracy. They left behind a power vacuum that allowed the Ori to consolidate absolute control, creating a fanatical empire that would, millions of years later, launch a crusade against the Milky Way. Upon arriving in the Milky Way, the Ultrans, now known as the Ancients, began a massive colonization effort. They settled on Dakara and Earth, establishing what would become the seat of their new empire. This period, lasting millions of years, saw the construction of the Astria Porta, the Stargate network. While technically a marvel of transportation, strategically, the Stargate network was a tool of empire consolidation. It allowed for the rapid deployment of resources and the integration of disparate worlds into a single hegemony. But this infrastructure had a fatal flaw. It was neutral. It had no safeguards to prevent hostile forces from using it. The ancients built the roads of the galaxy, but they failed to police them, a mistake that would later allow the Goa'uld to project power across thousands of light years with terrifying ease. The fragility of the ancient hegemony was exposed roughly 5 to 10 million years ago, when a devastating plague swept across the Milky Way. Whether this pathogen was of natural origin or a biological weapon sent by the Ori remains a subject of historical debate. What is certain, however, is the ancients' response. Despite their mastery of biology, evidenced by the Dakara superweapon, which was capable of rewriting the genomic structure of all life in the galaxy, they failed to contain the outbreak. Faced with extinction, the ancients once again chose flight over resolution. They boarded their city ships, most notably Atlantis, and fled for the Pegasus galaxy. This was the Great Abandonment. Consider the geopolitical reality of this decision. The ancients didn't just leave, they left their technology behind. They left the Stargate network operational. They left outposts, laboratories, and weapons platforms scattered across thousands of worlds. In doing so, they created a technologically advanced playground for the scavenging species that would evolve in their wake. When the Goa'uld eventually rose to sentience, they found a galaxy ready-made for conquest. They did not have to invent interstellar travel. They simply had to unbury the stargates the ancients had left behind. They did not have to invent energy weapons. They scavenged ancient designs. The brutal reign of the system lords, which enslaved humanity and countless other species for millennia, was directly facilitated by the infrastructure the ancients abandoned. The ancients' retreat to Pegasus was not a survival strategy. It was a gross negligence of their custodial duties to the Milky Way. If the abandonment of the Milky Way was a tragedy, the colonization of Pegasus was a catastrophe. Arriving in a galaxy devoid of sentient life, the ancients began what they called a seeding program. They created human life on hundreds of worlds, effectively playing God to a new galaxy of worshippers. But in their hubris, they failed to account for the local ecosystem. On a world where the ancients had established a foothold, the Eratus bug, a parasitic organism with regenerative capabilities, began to feed on the humans seeded by the ancients. Through a process of horizontal gene transfer, the bug's DNA mixed with human DNA, giving rise to the Wraith. This is the pivotal moment of the Pegasus tragedy. The Wraith were not an invading force from another dimension. They were a direct consequence of the ancients' presence. The ancients provided the food source, human populations, that allowed the Eratus bug to evolve. When the war began, the ancients possessed vastly superior technology. Their Aurora-class warships were invincible in one-on-one combat against Wraith hives. However, the Wraith possessed numbers and a desperation that the ancients lacked. The Wraith cloned soldiers by the millions, swarming ancient positions through sheer attrition. The ancients, arrogant in their technological superiority, were slow to adapt. They underestimated their enemy, viewing the Wraith as a nuisance rather than an existential threat until it was too late. Slowly, system by system, the ancients were pushed back. The very humans they had created were left defenseless, harvested by the Wraith to fuel their war machine. The protectors of the galaxy had become the architects of its farm. By 800 BC, the mighty Lantean Empire had been reduced to a single city, Atlantis. Besieged for 100 years, the city lay submerged under the ocean of Lante, protected only by a shield powered by depleting zero-point modules. The ancients had the power to destroy the Wraith. They possessed the Atero device, capable of destabilizing Wraith hyperdrives, though it came with the side effect of destroying stargates. They had Project Arcturus, an attempt to extract zero-point energy from our own universe. But in every instance, moral hesitation or scientific failure prevented them from delivering a decisive blow. Finally, facing the exhaustion of their power supplies, the Lantean Council made the same decision their ancestors had made millions of years prior. They ran away. They dialed Earth, the home they had abandoned eons ago. They stepped through the gate, leaving the Pegasus galaxy to the mercy of the Wraith. This was the ultimate betrayal. The humans of Pegasus, who looked to the ancestors for salvation, were left to a cycle of culling that would last 10,000 years. The ancients returned to Earth, not as conquerors or saviors, but as refugees hiding from their own failures. Some integrated with early primitive humans, planting the gene that would eventually allow modern humans to use their technology. Others chose to meditate and ascend, shedding their physical forms entirely. This brings us to the final and perhaps most damning phase of ancient history, ascendance. Having achieved a higher plane of existence, the ancients adopted a strict policy of non-interference. They claimed this was to protect free will, arguing that lower beings must evolve on their own. However, this philosophy ignores the material reality they left behind. The galaxy was not a blank slate where free will could flourish. It was a rigged game. The Goa'uld were using ancient technology to subjugate the galaxy. The Ori were building a crusade to convert or destroy all non-believers. By refusing to intervene, the ascended ancients were not protecting free will. They were protecting the status quo of tyranny. They watched from the higher planes as the Goa'uld system lords committed genocide. They watched as the Wraith culled millions in Pegasus. They had the power to stop it with a thought, yet they did nothing. This inaction transforms their legacy from one of benevolence to one of complicity. They were the absentee landlords of the galaxy, content to live in enlightenment while the tenants of the universe they built lived in squalor and fear. The story of the ancients is a cautionary tale of power without accountability. They were a civilization that could build stargates, create life, and cheat death, but they could not solve the fundamental problems of governance and responsibility. Their solution to every crisis, the Ori, the Plague, the Wraith, was to retreat, leaving the consequences for others to suffer. Earth, and indeed the galaxy, survived not because of the ancients, but in spite of them. We inherited their mess, fought their wars, and ultimately had to clean up the timeline they broke. The tragedy of the ancients is that they were the most powerful beings in history, yet they lacked the courage to simply stay and fight for the worlds they created. Like, follow, and share if you want more tales.